Hi friends and family, IB here. This is episode 3 of Hold the Door. In this video series, I like talking about my faith in Jesus and my relationship with the church, but through the lens of either personal experience or what I see as vision expressed to me by other literary geniuses or people like Tolkien, or in the last video I talked about Watership Down with Richard Adams. So for this video specifically, I'm going to talk about thorns. A few different anecdotes from my life, and then what we learned from Genesis about man, in a sense, being cursed to work with thorns because of the fall, and what I've learned about that, and what I'm going to try to take away from this, and maybe what you can, be reflecting on. Now, just to be clear, I'm not a theologian. I'm not an expert on the Bible. This is a personal walk that I'm trying to share with others, and either help people who are unbelievers see what it's like to be a believer and find some hope or some peace there. And if you are a believer, just maybe receiving some encouragement or something to think about. All right, so I'm going to tell you first. In one of my past videos, I think I went a little bit into my past as a sinner before I came to the faith. Now I'm a sinner in the faith, and I am trying still to combat my sin, as I was back then. But as I learned, as my dream, you watch that video of the door dream, what it's like to fight your sin or fight sin in general without God, it's kind of hopeless. So let's backtrack to that time in my life again, where I was struggling with the church. I was I always, in a sense, wrestle with God. I hate to admit it, but I still have my issues, and I still have my issues. Let me be clear. I know this. They're my issues, not God's issues. But I struggle and I wrestle with myself and I wrestle with God. But what I'm saying is, there was a time when I was sick and when I was still struggling to accept the church and accept Jesus into my life, that I had this vision, in a sense. And when I say this, I mean it very loosely. I don't mean it as like a prophetic dream or something that like I was like hallucinating. It was much more of like an inner mind image of a metaphor for what I was going through. And it was this: I was in a place of sin, and getting out of my sin was painful and awful. But I realized that the only way to go was through the thorns, in the direction that I had to escape the thorns, or to go back on the path that was clear of thorns, but it was leading me back and deeper into the thorn thicket, with this idea of this. The thorn thicket was my situation, and I had gotten there by sin, and the only way out was to follow the light. But because I was in the thorn thicket, the only way out was through the thorns. As I say in my book, some people would rather strain and complain than molt through pain. And the idea is like, yes, to a certain extent, you have to shed the constricting, painful circumstances that you're in, but you have to push through it in order to get through it. I mean, this is not just a Christian concept, or I should say it started as a Christian concept and became a more generalized philosophy that people have adopted. But my story doesn't end here. My story doesn't end with this vision of me being, in my life, spiritually even, trapped in this thorn thicket, and the only way out was to continue pushing and fighting my way through the thorns that I had put myself in, or even placed before myself and allowed to grow around me, knowing that I was working my way towards this light. Whereas in the past, I had so many times, when confronted by the pain of moving through this thorn thicket, only decided to turn around and go deeper back into the thorns. And what happens when you do that is you just find darkness and misery. And when you turn around to come back out of the thorns have grown up behind you again. So you're always fighting your way out through the thorns. And this is an awful experience to be in. And I think for many of us, we feel like this is our lifestyle, especially if we're not Christian. And as a Christian, as a new Christian, I think for some of us who have been deep in sin, or deep in some of the more addictive, obvious sins, I think it can feel very much like in your early walk in Christianity, you are fighting your way out of the thorns all the time. And the thorns are always pricking you and prodding you is awful. So anyways, that's my little anecdote. So let's come and fast forward to the future here. I am now still in this position where I'm still fighting my way through the thorn thicket, and I'm trying my best not to backtrack, knowing that it just makes more pain and hardship in the long run, and that Jesus really doesn't want me to do that, and God doesn't really want me to go backwards into the thicket. He wants me to keep pushing through the difficulty. So let's fast forward. I'm serving my church in kind of like a minimum kind of way that I can, by like showing up and doing some yard work around the church every now and then as a part of my offering to the church. And my main job thus far has been removing a fallen kiave tree that fell right next to the preschool fence. And if you're not from Hawaii or this part of the world, a kiave tree is a tree with thorns on it that can be quite large. And the way that they grow on the wood, they grow off at angles, and when they break off and fall on the ground, they are like caltrops, if you know what that is. If you don't, it's just something that sticks right up in the sole of your foot, right through your boot, right through your shoe. And that's just the start of it. But in the process of cutting this tree apart and hauling the stuff and moving it, I got to know thorns really well. And it's an interesting connection and analogy with like the Christian walk. And not to mention the symbolism behind, Adam in Genesis getting evicted essentially from the garden, and God condemning him to toil in the ground. By the sweat of his brow he will eat. And I have the Bible here. This is the English Standard Version. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And I've reflected on that a lot. And here's why. As a young man, and I think as a more liberally minded man, and as a pagan minded man, it seems to me that there ought to be, or it seemed to me, and at times still seems to me, that there ought to be a proper way to live this life without thorns, without thistles. There ought to be a Shambhala or a utopia in this world where we get to truly just enjoy this life. That if I do well upon others, that if my karma is more or less balanced, or if I have enough money, or if I have enough time, or if I make the right choices, or if I'm lucky, whatever you want to call it, that life will be good to you. And yes, you accept there'll always be hardship, but you feel like eventually you will root up all the thorns and the thistles from the labor in the field of your life, and it will be easy pickings. And as a young man, this seems plausible, and it seems guaranteed to some extent that that's really what's going to happen. The older I got as a man, the more I saw that that wasn't true. I'm not sure how other people feel about this. I don't know. I don't believe anyone goes through life without this as their curse. I think it's clear that like this is the curse upon the land and the people of this world. I'm sure that there are many people, especially non-Christians, who would argue that that doesn't apply to them, that they're perfectly happy and that there are no thorns and thistles in their life. And I'm not going to comment on that because, again, I'm new to this. So this is for me and the people that agree with me, that it feels like, no matter what I do, there are thorns and thistles in my life. There are bills that I can't afford to pay. There are responsibilities on top of responsibilities. And when I accomplish one responsibility, it leads to 10 more responsibilities that I didn't expect. And that people are mean to me when I am trying to be nice to them, and that I'm mean to people when I thought I was trying to be nice to them. And just like the endless stream of things. You're just like, oh my goodness, like life is complicated, hard, and it's messing with me. I almost said the F word there, but I'm trying not to say those things as much. It's constantly messing with me. But the Bible says right here, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. It kind of sounds like he's saying that life is going to suck. No matter what. I don't know if that's true, but like that's what I'm starting to see. So anyways, let's just talk about thorns for a second. because he says thorns and thistles. I don't know about thistles. That's a whole other thing. I thought it'd be interesting to learn more about thistles and see what that meant. Obviously, thistles have thorns, but I think there must be something else to thistles that I don't know. But let's just talk about thorns in general and talk about what it's like to actually work with thorns, because this is kind of an agricultural metaphor that applies to many things. So let's imagine, like, by clearing this thorn tree, and I've done much other thorn related landscaping stuff in my life, but let's just talk about this experience with this thorn tree on this church property on sacred ground, if you believe in that sort of thing. That I'm trying to do something good and I'm still dealing with the thorns of the world. And this is perfect. This is exactly what God said would happen. So let's see what I learned here, and let's see what there is about thorns. The first thing about thorns is that they hurt, and it says that right there. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. In pain. So there's pain involved. If the thorns are there, there's pain. They do hurt. They prick you. They prod you. You can toughen your hand with calluses, but there's always a soft spot of your skin that they're going to hit and that's going to hurt. And that brings me to the other thing about thorns is they're everywhere. They're at random. When you're trying to move a huge limb with like 1,000 thorns on it, and they curve and twist and bend and whip in every which way as you're moving them, they're going to come at you from all angles. I mean, there are moments where I was getting like pricked in the back of the calf and I didn't even know there was a stick behind me. And I'm not saying this to complain, because to be clear, like, some of this I like the difficulty and the labor and the sweat and the pain, and partially remembering what Jesus went through on the cross. It was easier for me to be on church ground, on church time, in a sense, in an offering time, thinking about God for that amount of time, knowing that every time like a thorn drew blood or caused pain, that I was worshiping. It was easy to do that. What gets challenging is when you have to take that metaphor and apply it to 24 hours, 7 days a week of your life. And this is partially what this video is about. What it's like to look around you at the thorns of your life and see that, oh, this sucks. Oh, this sucks. Oh, this sucks. Ooh, this hurts. Well, this is just what God has intended. And if I can, for 2 hours, say, this is good, this brings me closer to Jesus, this is what Jesus went through, I must be able to do that in my life as well. So 2 things about thorns. They hurt, and they're everywhere. I think the third thing that is similar to the second thing, that they're everywhere, is that they're going to hurt you a lot of times before you see them, and you're not going to see them. They're going to be blending in with the ground. I was stepping on them all over the place. And they were, like I said, they were like swinging around behind me, and like I was stepping into like a thicker part of the tree, and they were all around me and I couldn't see them. So like, yes, the thorns will strike you from places you don't expect. And typically you're not getting pricked by the thorn you see. In fact, a lot of them were times I was looking at the branch, not seeing any thorns, and going to grab the branch to move it, and there was a thorn on the bottom of it that I just like pierced my hand with. So it's almost, you never almost see them until they're hurting you. You feel them first. And I think that brings us to another good part, is whether they're sticking in your skin or your clothing, or in my case, the soles of my feet, not my feet, my shoes, they stick with you. Thorns, they stick with you. They stay with you. And beyond just the thorns themselves, which you have to extricate from your clothing or your shoes, as I did, the next day at work, I was feeling those cuts in my hands all night. And the pain was very much lingering. So the pain of the thorns, beyond being immediate and sharp, also lingers and stacks. And surely the thorn of cooking over a grill, and the manual labor of cooking over high heat grill, and the stress of a kitchen, and the frantic energy that comes with line cooking, where occasionally I'm burning my hands, you see how the stacking pains and the lingering pains overlaps with the fresh new pains, and the fresh thorns of line cooking combining with the thorn tree cutting. And this is just the endless accumulation of life's woes and pains in this sense. Just like how Jesus was betrayed by his friends who fell asleep, and then betrayed by Judas, and then was mistreated in court, and was then abused, and then ashamed, and then forced to carry or before he was forced to carry a cross, he had people choosing to free Barabbas, who was kind of unworthy of salvation, versus man, they wanted to crucify Jesus instead, and then Jesus has to carry a cross. It's like all of these things must have clumped together into one great woe. And this, I think, new age mentality of like living completely in the moment and living completely like not letting like pain and suffering like stack into each other. I don't know what Jesus was experiencing in that moment. I imagine all of those pains were all kind of shared in the whole experience, and to the point where he's on the cross seeing the people he loves that he's trying to save screaming for him to be crucified and jeering at him. And he's experiencing the pain of crucifixion. Like, I don't think that the pain of the crown of thorns and the lashings on his back and the betrayal of Judas and the betrayal of his friends in the Garden of Gethsemane, I don't think that all of those pains had already evaporated. I think that they were still lingering in him. So again, that's the thorns of life, is the pains themselves clump together in a kind of insidious way. And it's awful. And I think another final thing about the thorns, well, I shouldn't say final, but maybe the last thing that I'm going to talk about with the thorns in this experience was this idea that if someone must work here in this patch of ground, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. You shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. The thistles and thorns come out of the ground. This is the same ground that someone is working to provide sustenance. And there will be sweat on the brow and pain associated with it. And I think this is the idea of the Christian, the idea of thorns in a sense, and the martyrdom of Christ, and the martyrdom of ourselves as Christians that we're supposed to participate in as Christians, which is that, well, in the case of the nursery school, in the case of the tree, kids needed to play there. Teachers needed to act and live there. People needed to be able to mow around the outside of that fence. And in fact, other people needed to do other things in terms of construction and stuff in that area. Work needed to be done there. And somebody had to deal with the thorns at a certain point. And in this case, by the grace of God and by the plan of God, it happened to be me. I'm not saying it was because I'm so great. It just happened to be what I did. And I didn't get all the thorns away, mind you. They're still there, and I'm still working on the tree. But the idea of thorns is that there are thorns in life, and someone has to deal with them if people are going to work there. It could be the same person working there later. It could be another person working there later. And I think this is the most important aspect, is when you remember all the other things, that thorns hurt, and they're everywhere, and they're hidden, and they stick with you, and the pain lingers and sticks with you. But somebody's got to do it, almost always. And I think this is another problem with the New Age philosophy of like, there aren't problems if you don't associate with them. I don't think that's true. I think to some extent you can avoid problems and avoid hardship. But I also think that there's pain and suffering in the world. And if somebody doesn't deal with it, then the person that's forced to work there is going to have to deal with it. And I think this is, in essence, the idea of Christian, what's the word? Charity? Am I using the right word? Where Christians go out of their way to do good for other people, knowing that like it's easier to live in America than it is in Haiti, maybe, or in Kenya or something. So to go on a mission and build a school or help build a well or donate Christmas presents to these other people and spread the gospel, like that's the most important thing, sure. But this idea that if there's thorns somewhere and we've taken care of the thorns in our spot, then we should go take care of the thorns in someone else's spot so the person can just till there, knowing that eventually they'll have to deal with the thorns there too. But I think that's the idea, is that as Christians, maybe we can look at thorns as an opportunity to save another person from the thorns, and have that empower us as a sense of love first, and then duty, and then strengthening. I was just reading James also this morning. I like the book of James. Sorry for taking the time to look, but I think this is applicable. Here we go. Besides just having it be a duty to Christ and the church and others as good humans, even if you're non-Christian, you could acknowledge it. Doing charity like this is good for other people, and it's a good act of service. And then there's this. This is James 1, verse 2. Is that how you say it? Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. Testing of your faith, trials of various kinds. So the idea that, like, yes, I'm going to deal with thorns now also to produce steadfastness in me, and that's a virtue, and it's good. Like, we should be looking to increase virtue in ourselves. But I think when we live our lives by this mentality of, I'm going to do my duty, and I'm going to produce steadfastness or virtue. I'm going to produce virtue in myself, and I'm going to do this because I have to, and then I can reap I can sow and plow and sow and reap the rewards of this labor. That's great. But when you leave out the mentality of like, and then there's thorns that other people would have to deal with, that if I deal with them, that's great. Now I'm saying this to you as a man who has let my wife work full time, who has lived under the shelter of my mom's roof and like kind of mooched off of her, who has, asked favors and all kinds of, and received gifts and blessings from all kinds of people. It's like, I'm not saying I'm perfect in this. I know what it's like to be the one hiding from the thorns and letting another person deal with them. And it's something that I struggle with, is when I look around at all the thorns around me in my life, to say like, I got to go out there and bleed, and I got to go out there and cut myself, and I got to go out there and just be in pain and suffering, to remember that it's my duty, and to remember that it produces virtue, and to remember that it's the only way to reap the fruits of the harvest of this world, is to get through the thorns first. Sometimes that's not enough for me. Sometimes I'm overwhelmed by that. It's like, I don't know why I don't know what weakness or sin is programmed into me to make that the simple act of duty and reality not enough. But almost always what pushes me over this edge, and I never connected this before, was this understanding that, well, if you don't do it, someone else has to do it. And as I've said, in sin, that hasn't always been enough for me. Sometimes I'd rather let someone else deal with it. But I think it's an important thing, and as I said in the beginning of this video, I want to have something to take away from this time in my life, which is that as a man especially, but as a Christian, it's important to look at those thorns and remember that that patch of ground is God's ground. And God does want us to be fruitful and multiply. And he does want us to till and excavate the ground of this world. And I don't just mean in an agricultural sense. I mean in the sense of spirit, and in the sense of ministry, and in the sense of community, and all sorts of things. In every aspect, he wants us to treat this like a Christian kingdom and try to make it one, accepting that it's by his will and grace that this will happen, and that ultimately, I think, also accepting that it won't happen until Jesus comes back. But still, we ought to try. God did not say there's going to be thorns and thistles, so stop trying to grow food. No, he said there will be thorns and thistles, and you will be in pain, and you will sweat, and you will have to do this. That's the key thing. It's like, you will have to do this, which is hard. But I think for me, oftentimes when I thought, well, I have to do this and this sucks, I don't want to do it. I'd rather die, or I would rather just starve, or I would rather let someone else deal with the thorns. But then when you realize that someone has to do it, it has to be done. And if another person has to do it, then this was the misconception in my mind. I wanted to pretend that if I did it, there were thorns. And if another person did it, there wasn't thorns. because they were better at it than me, or because they were more gifted than me, or because they had better advantage than I did. But it's denying the truth that God laid before us, which is that there are thorns and they must be dealt with to eat, to sow, to reap. You must do this. You must deal with the thorns. You cannot grow with the thorns. The thorns are going to be there. You have to deal with them. And you cannot pretend that they're not there for other people. It's just not real. It's not a realistic belief. God did not say in that chapter, Adam, if you work the ground, there will be thorns, but Eve, if you do, the thorns won't be there. No, they will be there for anyone, for all of the offspring and progeny of Adam and Eve. There are thorns. So this reminder, this full acceptance of there are thorns in life. There's pain and suffering, and there's pricks that come unexpected, and they stick with you, and they bear a heavy, cumbersome, fatiguing load on you day after day, year after year. But if you don't deal with them, someone else has to. I think that's incredibly important to remember, especially in this modern age. I've collected unemployment when I was a kid, just in the winter, my seasonal job. But I've been the guy, as I said, mooching. I've been the guy letting other people bear that burden, just deluding myself and lying to myself. This is the value of Christian virtue, is understanding that sometimes you don't need to understand all the details to understand that it's wrong to be a mooch. But then you can look into it, as I have in this, and have this introspection of the thorns, we're supposed to deal with the thorns, and if you don't deal with the thorns, someone else has to, because the work has to be done. So anyways, that's my interpretation of this, is from now on, I really want to walk around saying there's something that has to be done, and if I don't do it, someone else is going to get cut and bleed, whether it's emotionally or physically or spiritually. Someone else has to do the work, and no, it's not going to be easy for anyone. It's not. So that's my little interpretation on thorns. I hope that is interesting to you, if not helpful. And I hope that it's also revealing to you, as this is an early video in this video series, that I am really growing here, and I'm starting new. I'm not putting, I think in my last video I might have come across as a little bit assertive about what I believe and what I think is right. And I want to be careful about doing that, because I am new to this. And I like formulating my opinions and sharing them, but I also want to be clear that I'm in the midst of the thorn thicket myself. And much of my life has been spinning in endless circles looking for a God-free solution, and there isn't one. So I'm here now trying to not only find my way to serve God, but also to help other people find their way to serve God in whatever little way I can. So if that means a little bit of humility and telling, a little bit about the thicket that I'm in, and seeing a way out of it for me, and setting a goal for myself and letting it be known, then I hope that that's what I'm supposed to do. Anyways, I hope that this is interesting. All right, take care. Love you all. Bye.